I would want to welcome you, and I want to thank our Swedish partners to make this event possible, and I mean the two events, because we will be tomorrow also in Lund. And I'm particularly pleased and very grateful to VINNOVA and the Swedish Research Council, and of course also to Kerstin, who with her energy made this possible and helped us that we can be here and present to you what the JRC is about. Because we feel when we look at the statistics of participation or of Swedish researchers in the JRC, it's a minority, but we found nevertheless a colleague who is here with us today, Peter Part. But we think statistically, but probably because VINNOVA, you're doing such a great job here in Sweden, nobody wants to go outside the country, so but nevertheless, maybe some of the things I'm telling you could trigger some interest. So it was already mentioned, the Joint Research Centre is part of the European Commission. Our commissioner is Commissioner Geoghegan Quinn. She is also responsible for DG Research and Innovation, which you probably know because they are the research funders. So they are the ones who are providing the money, and also in the upcoming Horizon 2020, they are the ones who fund research. Whereas us, the Joint Research Centre, we are the in-house science centre of the European Commission. That means we, if we look at Horizon 2020, we are the direct actions. So we are the little part of the Horizon 2020 which is directly funded European research. And what do we do with this? We are the technical arm, let's say the scientific and technical support throughout the whole policy cycle. It was mentioned we support the different directorate generals of the European Commission in the different policy areas. And to highlight the role of our Board of Governors, from each member state we have one representative, and Kerstin is for Sweden. And the Board of Governors is also looking, for example, at our work program and is a strategic link between the countries and our JRC. The JRC was established in 1957 as part of the Treaties of Rome, of the Euratom Treaty. So that means the JRC is written in the existing European treaties. And we are 7 institutes in 5 different member states. In total about nearly 3,000 staff. And the sites of the JRC, the biggest site is in Italy, Ispra, where we have a bit more than 3 institutes, and Peter is also based in Ispra, so he will also tell you a bit about how it is in Ispra. But I was also 11 years in Ispra and enjoyed it very much. I also started in the JRC as a postdoc, so and I stayed on. The JRC has about 1,400 scientific publications, and our budget is 356 million annually, plus 62 earned income. I speak about what it means, earned income, a bit later, because it is another possibility of cooperation, because we can be a partner in framework programs. And we are having 7 different scientific institutes. That's why it depends of which area you are from, but it's very likely that you would find something where your expertise could fit in, because it ranges from environment and sustainability to health and consumer protection, protection of the citizen, but also Institute for Prospective Technology Studies, which is based in Seville, in Spain. So this is the only institute which is only, let's say, think tank-like institute, whereas in all the other institutes we have also research infrastructures, laboratories, which I'm also explaining a little bit later. Then we have the Institute for Reference Materials and Measurements, and our only purely nuclear institute, the Institute for Transuranium Elements in Karlsruhe, and the Institute for Energy and Transport in Petten, close to Amsterdam. Our key priorities are economic and monetary union. This is, when you look at the European priorities, no longer a surprise. After the financial crisis, lot of work also in our institute, in a research institute, and I think that is maybe also something which is a bit new and not known to a lot of people, that because when the financial crisis came, a lot of decisions had to be taken, and there was no basis, there was no analysis how these decisions sometimes were taken. So our director general took an existing group of econometrics, transformed it in a task force, and later on it became a unit which gives now scientific analysis to financial stability. And this group is working very close with also with the research department of the European Central Bank. So that is really something. And if you look at all the policy issues which are coming these days out of the European Commission, banking union is a lot in this area. Then support to internal market and jobs growth and innovation. Under this heading you can find a lot of activities. Low carbon economy and resource efficiency, so everything related to environment, climate change, energy and transport. Then we are doing a lot on agriculture and global food security, but also public health, safety and security, and nuclear safety and security. Because our origin is that we were a nuclear research center. So when the JRC, as I said before, in '57 was founded, we were founded as a purely nuclear research center. The first European countries wanted to be competitive in the research, nuclear research, with the United States at this moment, and that's why the first 6 countries have decided to create a nuclear research center. And that explains also, when I showed the map of the JRC, where we are located, except of Spain, because this came later. But the first countries were the countries which hosted JRC institutes due to the nuclear work. But we are also having a lot of cross-cutting activities. And this is also, I think, if you look at the Horizon 2020 structure, it becomes more and more important also for scientists not to work in silos, but really to look at a more interdisciplinary approach. And looking at activities like policy analysis, impact assessment. This is also something where the JRC is very much involved, because every director general of the European Commission has to do an impact analysis when they come up with a new piece of legislation. And there the JRC is working and providing scientific facts in quite a lot of areas. Foresight and horizon scan was already mentioned. It becomes more and more important to look forward. What are the issues? Where should we invest more? Where should we pay attention for the future? Economics. But then this is linked a lot to modeling, to the different modeling activities, knowledge transfer, education and training. I said that the JRC is supporting the policy cycle, and this shows you the policy cycle, and it also shows you that the JRC can really contribute at the different parts of the policy cycle, starting by policy anticipation with agenda setting, and this is, for example, through foresight, we know what can come up, or we think we know, at least we submit it to the policy makers who can then choose from the options and also have a look at what should be on the agenda. Then when the policy is formulated via expert advice, then when the policy is adopted, because there we can help to provide program options, but also once policy is implemented with compliance checks, independent verification and anti-fraud measures. And then also ad hoc policy support, for example, in crisis moments. I'll later on show you we have a crisis room in Ispra. And also policy evaluation, the effectiveness and impact assessment. I'm not going through all these details on this slide. It's just to show you, for example, in policy anticipation and sustaining European soil, and I think Peter will later on talk more about soil, but also new developments in nanotechnologies, because the Commission had brought out a definition of nanomaterials, so that is an area we're working in. Harmonizing environmental data, the Inspire project. Peter, are you mentioning it later on? So maybe it's interesting to know, because harmonization of geospatial data, per se, you might say, oh, why do we need this? And there's a classical example of building a bridge between two countries and the bridge doesn't meet in the middle because you start from different sea levels. You think this might be a joke. It happened between Switzerland and Germany, so it's real. So that's why before Inspire, these things happened. Making then policy implementation, we are working on smart grids because in the moment the European grid is what we are all looking at, but the European grid per se doesn't exist because the grid is very fragmented on national level, and there are even the 3 Baltic states which are not connected to the European grid, but they are connected to the Russian grid. So from an energy security point of view, that is not optimal. Then also calculating greenhouse gases from biofuel crops, because there's a lot of discussion on biofuels going on. Detecting genetically modified organisms in food and feed, because this is something in Europe where there is a legislation. And this is also a very concrete example where JRC helped the policymakers, because when the legislation came out that the European consumers want to know, are there GMOs in my food? Then there came up, yeah, we should measure it, we should label it. And then, of course, sometimes policymakers want to come up with a percentage which nobody can measure. So it doesn't make sense. So in our laboratory in Ispra, we measured, we made validations of the measurements, and then we gave a value which everybody in each member state can measure. So sometimes it's wishful thinking, and then sometimes we have also physical laws and chemical laws. So I think it's important to provide the policymakers with these facts. Another very interesting topic in the ad hoc policy part is nuclear forensics, because when nuclear material is found somewhere, even at a scrap yards or scrap coming from ships, like in Rotterdam or so, regularly on some ships you find some kind of radioactive material. And this is then sent to our institute in Karlsruhe, and they are analyzing there where this can come from. The worst case was many years ago when they found a little piece of plutonium in an airport in Munich. And also this was shipped to Karlsruhe, and it was analyzed in Karlsruhe. And due to the fact that they have an environmental database of where reactors stand, what surroundings, plus how the material is treated in the reactor, plus their chemical analysis, they could detect it from which reactors this material came from. And then it's of course an issue to find out what happened in this reactor. Responding to crisis, we have a global disaster alert and coordination system, which provides information and assessment, particularly via satellite images of disasters, and the European flood alert system and European forest fire system. I think you are mentioning, Peter, later on. And policy for anticipation, so science for water. I think this is also which will come later. Science for the financial sector I have mentioned, and economic foresight also. So I just want to highlight really important issues coming up: anticipation, foresight and horizon scanning, economic modeling, and socio-behavioral research. This is also something quite new in the JRC, and I think it's also in Horizon 2020. It has a much more prominent place than before. And really combining natural science and social science and humanities. Providing evidence-based policy options, including a cost-benefit analysis and impact assessment. And another very important topic is standardization, because in order to strengthen our competitiveness, it is important to work on standards, particularly to help to get standards quicker through. And that's why we are working with bodies like the standardization authority like Senelec, because it's also when the new industrial policy for Europe came out, one particular issue was on standardization and helping European industry to get standards through quicker. Because when you have a reliable policy framework, this is then also safety for the industry and help investment when they know this is an upcoming standard. we are doing this not on our own. So we are doing this in close cooperation with the EU member states. So that's why it was mentioned before that we had the visit of our Director General here to Sweden. But we want also to strengthen our links on operational levels. And that's why we have also on the table here an overview, for example, with whom we are working in Sweden, and we hope to enhance these partnerships. And we do this via agreements. We can have bilateral agreements, we can have agreements like institutional networks where we are working together. And we are trying to use various points of contact, of course, the national contact point, our board of governors, but also your research attaché based in the Research Working Party in the European Council in Brussels. But then also, of course, direct working contacts with academies, research institutes, university and industry. So I want to underline for the JRC, to getting all this information to feed in the policy process is key, but the more information we get via our networks, the better the information is, and the better can be afterwards a European policy. So in principle, it is a win-win situation for everybody if we can work together and use this to make better European policies. Strategic partners, just to highlight, the European Academy Science Advisory Council, which is the association of national science academies, and EuroCase, which is the association of science and engineering academies. And this is, for example, where your Swedish academy is also part of and working with them. Then we have also created a European Forum for Science and Industry, because this was another need, which in discussion with industry, that it depends very much the country. So maybe Sweden is more advanced than others, but it's not natural that scientists and industry are working very closely together. There are a lot of barriers sometimes to overcome. So we want to foster this dialogue, knowing about each other's needs also, and also seeing where there are synergies. Because with the fact that we need to enhance competitiveness, it is important to work hand in hand with industry. How are we doing this? Via different initiatives. When there's a topic identified, we can look in bringing also different players between universities, between research center and industries together. We can discuss this in the roundtables. We are also issuing a newsletter which comes out every 2 weeks, where we describe one topic, and we also take guest writing. So maybe this is also something where VINNOVA could present their work, because I think this would be also interesting in this forum, having bilateral meetings or doing specific projects together. Just one specific project I would want to mention. In Germany, we have been approached by the Ministry for Economics, because you know, that Germany has decided to have the so-called Energiewende, the energy transition, because they shut down, or they will shut down all their nuclear reactors. They shut down 8 quite quickly. And now they have to manage, and they wanted it to manage within Germany, because they took this decision unilateral. They didn't discuss with any neighbors. They didn't think of the effect it might have of neighboring countries. But now they realize that they should look at the Europeanization of the energy transition. And that's why they came to the JRC to discuss with us, that we bring together the discussion with the other countries, that we work on the models we have, on the policy options, because it is a big issue how energy will affect each other, energy transport, transmission, distribution. And so just we had last week a workshop, and it was very interesting to hear that they base, because they have now quite a lot of renewables in the grid, they had calculated, because of the weather forecast, that they will have a huge amount of photovoltaic on the 3rd and 4th of April this year to come in. And in the end of what was calculated, only half, because there was a high layer of fog which nobody had foreseen. So it created a major problem, because they had shut down the gas turbines and everything because they thought they don't need it. And then they had to contact all their neighbors in order to see what they can get at this day that the German grid didn't collapse. So that, and it was because of a layer of fog which nobody had foreseen. So I thought that was an interesting example. Coming to working with Swedish partners, so as I said before, the JRC has to earn 15% of its budget. 15, that was a decision from the European Council in order to show that we can be competitive. On the other hand, it should not be too much because then we might lose our independence, because being a European institute, we should serve the whole European Union and not only one single body. So we can be a partner in framework projects, but we cannot be a coordinator. So that in order to not have a conflict of interest. We manage scientific networks, and we have with Sweden 13 collaboration agreements. Collaboration agreements include, for example, that we can exchange staff, that we can exchange data, giving access to different databases which we have, but it does not involve transfer of money. Scientific networks, it's quite easy because there we have a lot of European networks and there it's quite easy to join. And framework projects, of course, depends on how the call is structured. Why working with a JRC and how? So, as I said, it can be via framework programs, via joint research activities, getting access to our sometimes large databases, and the advantage is that we have the European data, that we normally get from 28 member states the information and manage 28 different data sets, whereas you often can only rely on the one from your country. Exchange of information, personnel, of course, scientific papers we could have together, and then invite each other at conferences. I put at the end no transfer of money, because we are not a body which gives money, so I just want to make this clear. We are not compared to DG Research and Innovation. So I have mentioned that we can be an FP7 framework program partner, and that we can have letters of understanding, collaboration agreements. I think this I've mentioned. Examples of publications. So we have our own publications, but of course we are also publishing in scientific journals. I quickly want just to give you a taste of an idea of our large-scale research infrastructures. We have just reopened the European Solar Test Installation, which existed for already quite some years, but now has been completely renewed. And it's a European reference laboratory for the verification of the power and the energy generation of photovoltaic devices. So they're really assessing new and improved photovoltaic devices. This serves on one hand research, on the other hand industry. And the difference then in this installation is that if a research organization contacts them, they can perform because it's really now state of the art, and they can test make their experiments. We can make an agreement, and it would be then free of cost for this research organization to do their tests there. Whereas when industry contacts us, there of course they will have to pay for it. So that's a different of treatment of how the access to this infrastructure is used. We also in Petten have by now a pretty old reactor, the high flux reactor, and it's one of most powerful multi-purpose research and test reactors in Europe, and we are managing together with the national Dutch research center, the Energy Center, but we are using it for experiments on neutron beams for analytical applications. And we are producing radioisotopes for scientific, industrial and medical purposes in this part in Northern Europe. We have 2 accelerators, and they are both in our institute in Geel, in close to Belgium, close to Brussels. And another important feature of the JRCs, we are hosting EU reference laboratories. Reference laboratories work on methodology for testing, which then afterwards in each member state is in the national laboratory tested. So we have to validate and come up with methodologies which can be then used in each member state laboratory. We have this for feed additives, heavy metals in food and feed, mycotoxins, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, GMOs in food and feed, and food contact materials. We have in Ispra a very large laboratory for structural assessment. It's a reaction wall, and it's the biggest in Europe and the 2nd biggest in the world. And so what you see there on this picture is really like a big hangar where this reaction wall is standing, and really there are actuators then putting pressure which are connected to this reaction wall on, for example, what you see on the picture, a building or bridges. And then with models we see how the concrete reacts or how the bridge reacts, because we are also using this to come up with what is so-called Eurocodes, because Eurocodes are standards for bridges and buildings which are then used by our colleagues from DG Industry in order to come up with earthquake-resistant structures in Europe. Another, also in Ispra laboratory, is VELA, Vehicle Emission Laboratory, and there we measure exhaust. We measure emissions from trucks, cars, motorcycles, all kinds of, I think they are nearly measuring everything which somehow rolled along, and be it to cut your grass. So and this information which is used there goes then to our colleagues from DG Environment, who are coming up with a legislation on Euro 5, Euro 6 norms, so how much can your car emit. So this is another very concrete example on policy support. Then we have an Indoortron, where we measure, for example, outgassing of furniture, of things, and really to see what happens, and that's why you have this sealed chamber where then the chemical compounds which are released of material are tested. I've quickly mentioned before the European Crisis Management Laboratory, which is linked with the one which exists in Brussels for the whole Commission. So this is also backup to the one in Brussels. And in there, we are really looking at, on a 24-hour basis, early warning systems, crisis management, and then afterwards giving also support. And for example, we had the request from the Brazilian government, because they had 2-3 years ago these big flash floods, and afterwards they wanted to have an institute for natural hazards. So they were asking whether we could train them, because they knew about the existing work of JRC, and now we had trained Brazilian scientists, and they are now building a similar system in Brazil. And then another thing is a European Monitoring and Evaluation Program. And so we have one station in Ispra, but other stations around Europe, and these measurements are then compared, be it CO, be it ozone, be it other aerosol precursors. So these are then also comparison measurements, and Ispra is one of the stations. I don't know whether you will go in more detail on it, Peter, later on. But this is also in the Institute for Environment and Sustainability. And the same, the European Reference Laboratory for Air Pollution, which is also in Ispra. So I think I hit you now with quite a lot of information, but this is also to show you that it's very varied what we are doing in the JRC. So that's why, depending on your speciality, you might find it interesting to see whether somehow you could connect with us. Thank you very much.